delighted to welcome you to our Global Perspectives Institute today. We are so excited about the opportunity to address the issue of global competencies. But before we do that, I'd like to just make sure that we remember in the midst of the pandemic that we're in today, many years ago, we started dealing with another pandemic, AIDS. And today is December 1st, so it's World AIDS Day. And it's just fascinating to see how much progress we've made. But then I've been curious because I said, wow, we were able to almost have a vaccine ready for distribution for COVID-19, and we're still searching for a vaccine to cure AIDS. We've made tremendous progress, but this is still work in progress. So for us in terms of the AIDS epidemic, I think what we've learned that ending the HIV and AIDS epidemic, we've become more resilient. We've had impact, but we have to make sure that we continue to support people living with HIV and honor those who have lost their lives. I want to take this time now to introduce our speaker. We typically have a moderated panel for our Global Perspectives Institutes, but today, given the topic and the opportunity that we have to introduce global competencies through this webinar, we're calling it Sharpening Your Global Competencies for Successful Collaborations. And for those of us who work in the Global Ties US network, this is important, but I know that all of our sectors, corporate sector, our nonprofit sector, our academic sector, cultural competence is an incredibly important concept. How do we set the standards for that? And so I'm really pleased to introduce Nancy Ongstead, who is with Cultural Vistas, one of our national program agency partners in Washington, D.C. And understanding others and bridging differences are essential to success. Nancy joined Cultural Vistas in 2019 as their Senior Director for Internship Placements. So in addition to working with placement programs, and I have to tell you, Nancy, we've had tremendous success with Cultural Vista interns. So we're one of your customers and we thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Her responsibilities includes leading the intercultural competence, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at Cultural Vistas. And she serves as a staff liaison to their board of directors. Prior to this, Nancy held various positions with a study abroad organization, ISEP, and she was the vice president for enrollment management. She was the assistant vice president for operations and regional regional director. Her passion for international exchange began personally for her through a study abroad and internship program in Paris, France, followed by her participation in the teaching assistant program in France. She holds a master's degree in international education from George Washington University and a bachelor's degree in French from Wake Forest University. I'm so pleased to have Nancy with us. We were really appreciative when we learned about the global competency certification process. And we're very thankful that she is able to come and introduce this to us. We have several members of our Global Ties US network who are here. And many of us work with stakeholders that we know will have an interest in this certification. So Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you and again, appreciate you for the anticipated presentation that you'll share with us today.
Thank you so much, Jackie. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all, and I'm honored to be talking to you on World AIDS Day, which is a really great segue. Resilience, as Jackie mentioned, is really one of the competencies, global competencies. And I think, Jackie, you're right that on this World AIDS Day, we remember those who are resilient and continue to face discrimination, and global competencies and diversity and inclusion also mean accepting those with chronic illnesses at work. And so therefore, it's a really timely topic for many reasons. So since Jackie gave such a thorough and kind introduction, I'm just gonna jump right in. So I'm gonna start by sharing my screen, and I hope this works. Let's see. All right. I'm going to share, and then, so I'm hoping you can see the PowerPoint. Let me close that out. All right, so great, thank you. For our agenda today, what I want to do is go into a definition of global competence. What do we mean when we're talking about global competence? What are the measurable competencies that we want people to build in order to be effective between cultures? There's a lot of work that's currently being done between the intercultural competency space and the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So I want to talk about how those two meet and serve each other. I'll also talk about the importance of global competence for educators.
Oh, God.
Employers and employees, which Cultural Vistas is doing through the AFS Global Competence Certificate. So first of all, what is global competency? So the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development defines the global competency in this framework. There are 4 parts to it: knowledge, values, attitudes, and skills. So as you can see, they define it as the capacity to examine local, global, and intercultural issues, to understand and appreciate the perspectives and worldview of others, to engage in open and appropriate and effective interactions across cultures, and then to take action for collective well-being and sustainable development. Now, this comes from OECD, as I mentioned, and the program on international student assessment. If you're not familiar with PISA, I imagine most of you are. This is a test that is administered worldwide to assess how adolescents in different countries are doing on different topics. So it's usually reading, math, and it's reading, math, and I think science. And then in 2018, they started to measure global competency among adolescents. And so that's really exciting because that has a lot of implications for education in terms of policies, in terms of leadership skill building. So I would highly recommend visiting this link, and we'll send out the PowerPoint presentation so that you have it. So what's really important also to talk about is, what is culture? And this is something that I've really been thinking a lot about as we've become a globalized society. So really, when we're talking about culture and being interculturally effective, we're talking about any kind of social group with its distinct cultures. That could be within a country, within an ethnicity, that could be faith groups, linguistic groups, generational groups, but all individuals belong to multiple groups, and therefore that they have different cultural affiliations. And those cultural affiliations weigh differently on each person and how they see the world. Culture is not a monolith, right? You can see here all of the different ways that we can interact with someone, and that their perspective could be different, their worldview could be different. And I think this is really important to mention, because intercultural competency is not solely a means of communicating with someone across a border. This is just as important within the workplace, within the classroom, within universities. that we're building skills that don't make us experts of a culture and their actual values individually, that we understand, it's not about learning about German culture necessarily and what German culture is, because one, it's dynamic, it can be different among people, but also it's important to build the skills so that it can be applied to multiple cultures. So that's what we're talking about today. And this definition is one of the best that I've seen. And it's to be culturally effective. To be culturally effective doesn't mean that you're an authority in the values and beliefs of every culture. What it means is that you hold a deep respect for cultural differences and are eager to learn and willing to accept that there are many ways of viewing the world. No more, I don't need to say any more about that. It's just a really nice way of thinking about the competency underneath the skill set. So there are several tools that you're probably all aware of that measure competency. And it's important to measure competency because we want to know if we're improving. This is intercultural effectiveness doesn't inherently come to everyone, and there are different facets of it. And so in those facets, there are ways that we can flex that muscle and work it out and improve how we are interculturally effective. So I've taken there are 3 dimensions and 6 competencies in the intercultural effectiveness scale. And this was developed by Joyce Osland, among many other people at the COSI group, as a tool to measure intercultural competency. And at Cultural Vistas, we use this as a staff to determine sort of where we fall and where we need to train as staff so that we're walking our talk in building these competencies, as we hope our students who participate in our programs do. So the first dimension, and I'm gonna actually just read the definition of continuous learning so I don't forget anything, is continuous learning. And so what it means is the dimension examines how people cognitively approach cultural differences, the degree to which individuals engage the world by continually seeking to understand themselves, and also to learn about the activities, behavior, and events that occur in the cross-cultural environment. It examines people's tendency to be rigid in their view of cultural differences, their tendency to be judgmental about those differences, and their ability to deal with complexity and uncertainty. So this is really a level of curiosity about self, and a level of curiosity and inquisitiveness about the other, and exploring new things. Someone once said, and I think it's really true, you can't be judgmental and curious at the same time. So on a scale of intercultural effectiveness, someone high on a scale of self-awareness and exploration would be someone who is inquisitive, who is really interested in learning other things, and who has a desire to also understand themselves to better understand the other. The second dimension is interpersonal engagement. This is what this is acknowledging that interacting with people from different cultures really requires significant effort. It can produce stress, it can produce anxiety, and sometimes fear. And it assesses the degree to which individuals are able to wait to understand a situation, a person, or the tendency to make a snap judgment, which can produce anxiety and stress in a cross-cultural relationship. That kind of snap judgment can create conflict, whether it's in the workplace or elsewhere. The dimension also assesses the degree to which individuals can really manage and control their emotions, learn from their mistakes, and rebound from setbacks. So can you have a difficult cultural interaction and bounce back? Or do you just shut it down completely and not want to engage with that anymore? That is, we're going to do an exercise on that in a little bit. So, and then finally, the last dimension is what they call hardiness. And hardiness is interacting with people from different cultures or cultural backgrounds, and just having a positive regard for the other. So to review, this helps me a little bit. So continuous learning, being self-awareness and exploration, interpersonal engagement, a global mindset, relationship development. Do you have relationships with other people from other cultures? Do you like to understand different perspectives on things? And then hardiness, open-mindedness, assuming positives in others, and the ability to bounce back. So then we ask ourselves, why is this important? First of all, as our society is continuing to grapple with difficult concepts such as racism and inclusivity and what that means, intercultural competency and effectiveness can really be an on-ramp to discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So even if you're in a workplace that is really grappling with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, this really is part of building that culture, is developing these skills of self-awareness, understanding value in others, interpersonal skills to engage across different contexts. When working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, there's a lot more work to be done around understanding societal inequities in terms of the historical context and frameworks, and really diving deep into that. But they do share some really core components to the framework, and build skills that ultimately can lead to better collaborations and also environments that are more inclusive for individuals. So this is a framework from Diane Goodman that was recently put out. And I thought it was just a really nice way of combining the concepts of building knowledge, valuing others, having attitudes that are open to engaging across differences, and then skill building. So why is this important for employers? I think all of you have probably seen there's so much research on why diverse teams are more innovative and more productive. This is just one quote: that enriching your employee pool with representatives of different genders, races, and nationalities is key for boosting your company's joint intellectual potential. Creating a more diverse workplace will help keep your team's members' biases in check and will make them question their assumptions. This leads to innovation, thinking outside the box, creativity. But if we don't build an inclusive environment, diversity can not go as well as you would like, and can be not as productive as you would like. So when we don't bring our whole selves to work, we suffer. We lack engagement, productivity, our well-being is diminished. We aren't able to do our best, most innovative work, and we spend a lot of time trying to fit in, look good, say the right thing. And that lack of psychological safety makes it really difficult for the group to thrive because people are holding back who they are. Deloitte has done a lot of research on this, and it shows that the behavior of leaders who can be culturally competent, who are inclusive, can drive up the percentage of difference between the portion of employees who feel highly included and those who do not. And an increase in individuals' feelings of inclusion translates to increase in team perceived performance, decision-making quality, and collaboration. So again, building these skills on your teams is so important to setting a mindset that will help inclusivity in the intercultural space. Andreas Schleicher of the OECD Director of Education and Skills, this I think is beautifully said, so I just wanted to quote it. Such global competency is about building curiosity, opening minds. It's about compassion, opening hearts, and it's about courage, mobilizing our cognitive, social, and emotional resources to build a more human world. And that's also our best weapon against the biggest threats of our times: ignorance, the closed mind, hate, the closed heart, and fear, the enemy of agency. So the importance of putting this in our educational policies and curricula from an early age is so important to develop that open-mindedness, resilience, curiosity, and global mindset. Additionally, for students who are trying to get jobs and colleges who are training students to do so, the National Association of Colleges and Employers have defined 7 competencies that students should have when they're leaving college in order to be employable in the 21st century. And global competency is such a large part of that. And I'll show you how. The let me go back one. The global intercultural fluency is obvious, that connection is obvious. But in terms of critical thinking and problem solving, being able to obtain, interpret, and use knowledge and facts, we're talking about continuous learning and exploration, teamwork and collaboration, understanding customer viewpoints, lifestyles, that's relationship development, interpersonal engagement, and positive regard. Professionalism and work ethic, having personal accountability and learning from mistakes, that takes a lot of self-awareness, a lot of emotional resilience. In leadership, again, having interpersonal engagement and relationships that allow someone to use their empathetic skills. These skill building programs around global competency really focus on empathy and listening and managing emotions and how to resolve conflict. Career management also requires self-awareness and exploration, and digital technology requires adaptability. And so all of these skills really come down to these global competencies and what our students need to be learning. So how do we do this? With Cultural Vistas, we take a look at Kolb's experiential learning cycle. I hope this is familiar to some of you. When we're doing exchanges, whether that's virtual or mobile internationally, they're having a concrete experience. But in order to really learn from that experience, Kolb would say they need reflective observation, which is reflecting on the activity or experience, and abstract conceptualization, gaining this knowledge from their experience to then apply it. And so what we've done is we've partnered with AFS in their Global Competence Certificate. And the Global Competence Certificate offers several different facets to help students learn in different ways. It's not just students though, they have an at-home version and an at-work version. So when mobility is limited, especially, you can see the diversity and the intercultural effectiveness needed in your own environment. So the participants of the program would complete asynchronous modules, about 15 to 18 of them, depending on the program, in a customized learning environment. That means they're watching videos and they're going through and they're engaging in discussion forums, case studies, quizzes, interviews. And so they're really engaging in these concepts in a variety of ways. And then a qualified facilitator offers 3 to 4 facilitated dialogue sessions within that program in order to get students really talking about it. Now, as far as the content of the program goes, you can see it somewhat fits the model we were talking about earlier in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion and cultural competence. Now, I wouldn't say that this is a fully developed tool for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it does start to address some of the concepts in that space. So in terms of content, it starts with, who am I? Observing your context. So it takes you through your identity. How do you identify in all of these different ways that I showed you before? Is it in generational, in race, in ethnicity, gender, family situation, so that participants can really understand who they are and how their individual components really interact with how they see the world. Then they move on to understanding and valuing others. So it talks about stereotypes and generalizations, cultural value dimensions, what makes a culture, what's above the culture iceberg and below that you can't see, what communication styles are common in different cultures and what does that look like, polarized societies and spiritual diversity. It does touch on these social inequities. It again doesn't go deeply into one particular inequity, but it does talk about inequality, microaggressions, and the relationship between power and privilege. Then it moves on to building interpersonal skills to engage across differences. So empathy and listening, how to listen, what do you do when differences collide, and what are some tactics you can use to negotiate those differences? And then frameworks for suspending judgment. How do we take ourselves from that fundamental human being of judgment in order to survive, from back when, survival was the only thing that mattered, to now more complex and and understanding difference and not necessarily going with the hard wiring. And then finally taking action. What can we do to promote these skills and reach our goals? So with that, I am going to share with you the Global Competence Certificate, and I'm going to take you through a module. So I just want to make sure everyone can see this, and I'd love if you would take just a few seconds to look at this picture. This asks us to write down everything that comes up, but if you'd be willing to share out loud to make this more interactive, we would love to hear from you. What comes up for you? Let me move this so you can see it. What do you come up with? What comes to mind when you see this image? What do you think is happening here? Does anyone want to share?
Well, this is Annette. If it were like this past Friday, it could be a Black Friday, sale somewhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Annette. Anyone else want to take a stab at it? That's okay. Well, I'll just say that to me, I would look at this picture maybe and say, there's a crowd of people. It looks dangerous. There are people with masks on. So maybe some people are wearing masks, some people aren't for COVID. It looks like chaos. So there are a lot of things you can take from this picture. And so what I will do is go on to what the Global Competence Certificate would teach us. So I'm gonna play this all the way through.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation thinking, this is unclear, or this feels strange? This can happen at work, in school or university, or anywhere else where we see someone doing something different from what we would expect. A key ability in dealing with new or ambiguous situations is being able to suspend judgment. Suspending judgment means that we avoid jumping to conclusions and judging a situation until we have enough information to understand what is actually happening. A practical tool we can use for that is the Describe, Interpret, Verify, and Evaluate tool, also known as DIVE. DIVE is adapted from Dr. Janet Bennett and Dr. Milton Bennett's Describe, Interpret, Evaluate model. It helps us foster curiosity, suspend judgment, and respond more effectively and appropriately in unfamiliar or ambiguous situations. Let's take a look at the steps of the DIVE tool. The first step is description. In this step, we should answer the questions, what do I see? What elements can I observe in this situation? Describe the object, situation, or content using only observable facts. For example, the number of people in the scene, or objects present, and so on. The next step is interpretation. Here, the goal is to focus on what the situation might mean. The key questions are, how do I make sense of what I see? What are my assumptions about what I observe? What are some possible interpretations of what is going on? You should try and find at least 3 different interpretations in this step. It's really important to exercise our ability to find different interpretations, because that's what allows us to start questioning our judgment. One way of doing this is by asking ourselves, what else could be happening here? The third step is verification. In this step, you try to find out if any of your interpretations from the previous step are accurate. The key questions are, which of my possible interpretations are most likely to be accurate? What more do I need to know to find out which interpretation is most likely? To verify your possible interpretations, you need to learn more about the situation. A good source can be other people who might know more about the context. We call these people cultural informants. For example, you could share your interpretations with someone who belongs to or is very familiar with the cultural groups involved in the situation. The fourth and last step is evaluation. In this tool, an evaluation is a feeling that you have about what you see and interpret. The key questions here are, how do I judge what I see? How do I feel about what I think is going on? Is it good or bad? Right or wrong? Or something else? We all consciously or unconsciously judge what we see. Sometimes it is subtle, other times not so subtle. Going through the first 3 steps of the dive tool before reaching the evaluation step can help us avoid jumping to conclusions or misjudging a situation. When applying dive to a situation, it's a good exercise to try and come up with at least one positive and one negative evaluation for each interpretation that you think of. This helps us to practice our ability to look at things from different perspectives. It's often the case that our first reactions are actually interpretations or evaluations because this is how the mind works, whether we like it or not. It's human nature to want to classify and evaluate what we see. We frequently cannot control our subconscious or gut reactions. The dive tool can help us slow down and separate the facts from possible explanations and to suspend our judgment.
Great. So then the program would take us back here and it says, let's look at the original picture and what we wrote down. So as you noticed, I made a lot of interpretations. I assumed COVID was at play. I assumed this was chaotic. It would ask you to share your responses in the forum. So we'll find out what really is happening. So this is a launch getting off to a chaotic start in Hong Kong with labor groups protesting about working condition in mainland factories where they make iPhones, and walk-in buyers at stores complaining bitterly about being told they couldn't make purchases. So I assume this was, for instance, happening now during COVID. This was 2014, no one was sick. So you can see how by just describing, interpreting, verifying, and then evaluating leads to a much more accurate conclusion. So here would be a situation then that we could apply the framework to. So would someone be willing to come up with one description of what's happening here? You're at a restaurant and the table next to you, there's a man or woman more or less of the same age sitting across from each other. During that time that you're there, they don't talk to each other, but rather look at their phones. What are some descriptions of the situation? Applying the dive tool, for example. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see people because I can't see anyone. So if I'm thinking about people that aren't talking at a dinner and looking at their phones, instead of an interpretation, I might say something like, okay, they're looking at their phones, or they're working. That's an interpretation, but you could say there are 2 people who are looking at their phones, who are not talking to each other. There's no judgment in that. Mm-hmm. Then you move to the interpretation phase, where there are a lot of different ways that you could describe that situation. You could say they are a couple who got into an argument that aren't talking. Friends trying to get in touch with another friend who's late to join them. The couple prefers to communicate with each other via text message. The date's not going well. Lots of different ways you could do it. If you think about the positives and the negatives, it's easier to see that a lot of different things could be happening. And then you'd verify by, if you're brave enough, asking the couple what's happening, and then finally evaluate the situation on your own. But what's so interesting about this framework, in my opinion, is that it's a process that has to be worked on. These are skills that really have to be, or like muscles that need to be flexed because we're programmed so differently. And if you think about being a manager at an organization or being a colleague, how many times have you jumped to conclusion about what's happening when you have no idea what's going on with someone personally? They think differently. They, introvert versus extrovert, for example. All of those things come into play. So these global competencies and these concepts can really be applied in so many situations that just make us more open-minded human beings. So with that, I am going to end, and because I'm tired of hearing myself talk, and I would love to open it up for questions or discussions.
I just wanted to, this was excellent. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Jackie and Nancy for putting it on. One of the things that I really liked at the beginning was also your discussion about global competencies being so relevant, or cultural competencies, global competency being so relevant among, within the US, let's say. And the point you just brought up now made me think of like intergenerational cultures that can be challenging when you were bringing up, judgments, rushing to judgments, people's work style. Potentially the two people at the cafe were working on their phones. And, sometimes I have an instinct to, think like, you're not doing it the way I would do it. You're not doing it correctly, but that's not the case at all. It's just a different style. But I think this is really exciting. I also thought it had a lot of applications for other issues that we have in our world today, particularly misinformation or media literacy or any kind of critical thinking. When you sort of step back and say, how can this be? What's going on here? What does it appear to be versus what is it really? So I thought it even has some broader applications that could be helpful.
Thank you, Marian. Yeah, absolutely. And I think my favorite example is with my husband. I got married in February, and he is of a different political party than I am. And I almost didn't even go on a date with him because of it, right? And so I made a very snap judgment, and turns out, he leans like more towards me than I thought. And it took that discussion, and that polarization that we have is often preventing the conversation and leading to judgment. And yeah, Marian, so like you said, it's so relevant, both nationally and internationally. We have about 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again so that you all have my contact information in case you do want to be in touch. Let me pull it up. Get back to the end of the presentation. Sorry about that. There we go. So that is my contact information. I'd love to talk to anyone about this, about the tool, about its applicability. At Cultural Vistas, we are using it with not only our fellowship programs, but also we're a J1 intern trainee sponsor for the Department of State, and therefore working with our host companies and our interns to build those skills so that they have the preparation to go into their internships, and so that our host companies have the skills to work with the interns coming in. Because as we saw, it's not always the natural way of doing things.
Nancy, I really want to appreciate you, as Marian said, and Annette Alvarez said the same thing, although she had to hop off. When we think about, especially the role that you have with the internship program, and I'm thinking of one of the interns that we had. We knew that it was important for her to feel that we had our cultural competence here in the workplace. What I learned very quickly was that the wonderful host family that volunteered to have her stay with them was one of our new host families. And it was fascinating to learn how much was needed, both by the intern as well as the host family, because of the probably the generational issues. And so we know that this is important. A couple of years ago, we hosted 16 MBAs from a Chinese university, and we went to dinner one evening, and we're there, and they were very lot of interaction, and then all of a sudden everybody went to their cell phone. And I had a couple of hosts who are also major donors with us, and I said, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But what they were doing, they were going through a translator on their phones. So they wanted to translate the menu options. And
Wow.
so when you say rushing to judgment, we do have to be very careful about that. What I'd like to ask you, Nancy, is if you would just address quickly how the certification process works, because it's not just for our CBMs in the network, but some of our stakeholders in the community.
Absolutely.
That we serve as well.
Yeah, great question. So the certification is offered, Cultural Vistas, we've become qualified facilitators to offer the certificate. So we would work with groups and there's some customization that can be done to this because Cultural Vistas does have a custom environment. So tailoring the program to the different needs of the different stakeholders is absolutely possible. The participants will complete the modules on their own. I would say it takes about 15 to 18 hours. It's like about an hour a module to do all the discussion items. There's a lot of trying to engage people through discussion forum with other colleagues, not necessarily within their cohort. And then the qualified facilitation sessions are 90 minutes each. So that's about a total of 6 hours. And once a participant has completed all of that, which Cultural Vistas would administer, we have the portal to administer that, we would offer them a certificate. Now, this could be, added to a LinkedIn profile, added to a resume. What it does for especially those looking to get a job is provides a really tangible way to talk about some of the competencies that are those soft skills that are often so hard to discuss because they're not, coding, and they're not that like real hard skills based. And so it's a really great entry point for that as well, and makes an employer think twice and say, what is this? And that helps, especially in the study abroad framework, students really articulate what it is they've learned.
What's the pricing of the certificate? What's the price range?
Yeah, it can have up to 20 people per cohort. So it's a little bit different if you have an individual versus a cohort. As a range, it's about $400 a person, but less with a full cohort.
Okay, good. Have you done this with any, let's say, chambers of commerces or?
We have not yet. We are definitely looking to do that kind of thing. Right now, we're piloting it in our CBYX program, which is a youth exchange, a German US youth exchange, and our Muskie program, which is another professional fellowship program for Fulbright students. It's been a really wonderful tool, especially in COVID, because it is virtual and so it's accessible, which is important to us, and also doesn't require the mobility piece. So students can still learn, or participants who are at work can still learn where they are.
Okay, good, great. And everybody has, you've already shown your contact information. We'd like to thank you so much, Nancy. I don't know if there are any other questions before we close down. I think this is such a relevant tool, and I was pleasantly surprised when you sent the description of the connection to the diversity, equity, inclusion space that so many organizations have been thrown back into. We did this work, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. There's new adaptations, but it's more of a global frontier now. So
Absolutely.
thank you very much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and feel free to reach out. I'm happy to continue the discussion in any way.
Okay, I see one question.
Oh, yes.
What age range for students is the training appropriate?
That's a great question. So there are 3 different forms of this. There's what they call the mobility or the abroad, which is, it takes probably a student in higher ed or high school, a student through the pre-departure, on-site, and then re-entry. There's also the at work and the at home, which are for other professionals. So there is no real age limit. It is, somewhat introductory to the concepts. So if someone has had a significant amount of like intercultural competence training, we'd have to talk about whether or not it's right for you. But in terms of just having a shared vocabulary and really putting, again, the vocabulary to the concepts, it's been incredibly helpful for groups working together.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
good. So we say high school and above.
Yep.
And again, you did stress the customization.
Yeah.
So that I think that makes a huge difference as well. Good.
Yeah, and that would be in how we facilitate the dialogues and the topics we talk about in that.
Okay, if there's no further questions, we do want to emphasize how much we appreciate our attendees today. Next Tuesday, when we have our Global Perspectives Institute, we'll be focusing on another very important topic, especially for our business sector, and that's the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. We're going to have a 101. So for those of us who might not have gone through any of that training, another 45-minute introduction to the FCPA, which is a very important concept as we focus on global collaborations. Want to thank everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great day and stay safe.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you.